Hello guys and welcome back to FATBOSS TV. Today we're looking at the penultimate encounter in the Eternal Palace with Za'qul, Harbinger of Ny'alotha.
Yes, this 4-phase encounter is absolutely awesome, with a theme of using different realms in order to counter certain boss mechanics. The first 3 phases are pretty short, but gives you experience of all of the realms before needing to use all of them in the long last phase, where everything comes to a chaotic mess. Anyway, let's jump straight into it with the start of the fight.
So when you first pull the boss, he'll cover the entire outsides of the room in darkness. If you stand within this area, you take massive ticking damage, so you've got to avoid it. This is really easy to deal with, aside from when he casts Dread. This debuffs random players in your raid, fearing them until the debuff is dispelled or it expires. However, it'll also explode, dealing massive raid-wide damage. We counter this by using pre-shields and healing cooldowns with a Master Spell or a Tremor Totem each time, but even with stacking cooldowns it's still pretty dangerous. Since testing, this damage does seem to be significantly nerfed in the dungeon journal, so it's probably safe to say that on live you can just dispel everyone instantly providing the raid is at full health. Also to watch out for is the Crushing Grasp. When cast, this causes a portal to open on one side of the room, which a tentacle will punch through and then slam across the room. You've got a long time to react and move from it, which is important to do so because it deals a large amount of damage and can knock you back into the darkness around the edges of the room, which is pretty much an instant death. As for tanks, you'll want to remain stacked the entire fight because of Mind Tether. The boss will always connect the tank with the nearest player, dealing 50% of the damage the main tank takes to the linked player as shadow damage. If the linked player is more than 12 yards away, that percentage is increased further. Tanks also need to remain in the same realms, as the main tank will also be stunned for 10 seconds each time Mind Tether is applied. These 3 abilities, so the Dread debuffs, the Tentacles and the Tank Cleave, are used throughout the entire fight in all phases. Now not too long into phase 1, the boss will spawn 3 Portals of Madness. As these spawn, you need to stay away from them at first, as they'll fear anyone as the summoner ads appear from them. Now these guys will cast Dark Tear, spawning lots of small little vision ads. These have a 30 stack debuff that slowly over time drops, at which point they'll evolve into an even stronger mob. So you'll want to kill them off before that happens, which while testing was done with just passive cleave. If the Dark Tear channel from the summoner ad finishes, the entire raid is burst for a lethal amount of damage, so you want to make sure that you kill these ads off one by one. We move the boss to each just to keep up cleave. Now whilst doing so, it's very likely that the boss will reach 85% health and enter phase 2 and bring the entire raid into the Fear Realm.
Now whilst you're in this realm, the entire raid gains a stack of Hysteria every 15 seconds. This dot deals very little damage and it isn't very noticeable, but it is important for later in the fight. Also in this realm, the boss will cast Maddening Eruption. This creates a large targeting zone, typically on the opposite side of the room. Shortly after it appears, it will explode, dealing massive raid-wide damage. However, if the boss is placed within it before it explodes, the raid damage is removed, and instead the boss will take 30% increased damage for 20 seconds. This happens pretty often, so tanks need to be quick to react and move the boss the moment they spawn. For the raid to watch out for is Manifest Nightmares. This debuff is applied to 2 players, dealing a small amount of ticking damage whilst causing the player to spawn patches underneath them. These patches do absolutely insane damage, 2-shotting people in most cases. They also spawn and deal damage almost immediately, which means you've got to be spread before they're applied, otherwise you'll instantly cleave the raid to pieces. These patches will also spawn vision ads, which again we passively multi-dot and cleave down. Once you get the boss to 70% health, phase 3 will begin with the boss casting Delirium's Descent.
In Kilrock fashion, this will generate 3 portals in front of him. If they're left unsoaked, they'll explode, dealing large raid-wide damage. When a player soaks the circle, they're taken into the Delirium realm. Inside here, you gain Hysteria stacks at an increased rate, and also completely hostile to all other players. You do however gain a very large haste increase, allowing you to plow damage into the boss. If you ever die whilst you're inside here, you will instead be returned into the Fear Realm, but you will be stunned for 6 seconds. This can however be dispelled by your healers. So all you need to do in this phase is get your DPS to keep soaking the circles, keep being sent down so they can just plow damage into the boss, whilst everyone else just deals with the mechanics from phase 2.
Now once you manage to get the boss to 50% health, the first Arcanist woman lady will drag the entire raid back to the normal realm from phase 1, and she'll now stand still, keeping open a portal, and this is where the final phase begins. In this phase, the boss will continue to have that tank link and the tentacle slam as Loz already mentioned, but the dreads have evolved into manic dreads. This makes the debuff players also leave behind patches that explode after a few seconds when they've been dispelled, which means ideally you want them to be dispelled away from the raid, so we opted to use manual dispels here instead of AoE ones. Once the patch has finished exploding, players can now stand within them and gain a stacking debuff. At 5 stacks of this debuff, you'll be sent into the Delirium realm. This needs to be done because the boss on a timer will cast Dark Pulse. This applies a massive absorb shield to himself, and if the shield is not broken in time and the cast finishes, then all players in all realms are hit with a massive amount of damage. By having players go into the Delirium realm beforehand, this is much easier to break as they have that massive 80% haste increase. Whilst testing even on normal mode, this felt like a requirement in order to break the shield, unless you use something crazy like Bloodlust and large DPS cooldowns. After you have broken the shield, and if you're in the Delirium realm, you can go over to the first Arcanist and use an extra action button while standing on her portal. This will bring you back to the normal realm. Now the boss in this phase will also begin to spawn the horrific summoners you saw from phase 1. The only difference here with these guys is that they can only be attacked from the Fear realm. To access that realm, you need to stand on top of their portals and hit your extra action button. So this sounds pretty easy, right? The boss gains a massive shield, you send some people into the Delirium realm to break it. The ads spawn, you send some people down into the Fear realm to kill them off before their cast is finished. Sadly, it's not that simple. When players are within the Fear realm, the mechanics from phase 2 and 3 will be active, and only can be seen from within that realm, yet the damage aspects will hit everyone in all of the realms. So to make that clear, the Maddening Eruption circles still need to be soaked by the boss, or it's a wipe, and players of the Manifest Nightmares need to make sure that their patches are away from people in other realms, or it's a wipe. To make matters worse, the Manic Dread damages also apply to all realms, and the damage from this far exceeds anything else, forcing everyone to be in the same realm so that they can be affected by shields and healing cooldowns so that they're topped quickly after the damage has come in.
So this phase requires a shitload of communication, and the room for different strategies is actually pretty high. The way that we were doing it on PTR was just to keep everyone in normal realms whenever possible, especially the tanks, as this just means you never really need to worry about the Hysteria stacks. DPS and healers would only ever move into the Fear realm whenever the ads were up, and whilst they were in there they would communicate and place down wall markers for the tanks to move into for each of the Maddening Eruption circles. As for the Dark Pulse shields, we didn't do anything special apart from sending players down beforehand into the Delirium realm just so they can nuke the shield off. And before Manic Dreads were applied, everyone would return back to the normal realm by speaking to the Arcanist or using the ad portals to be topped back up, but also to let the Hysteria stacks reset. And after all that's done, the fight just repeats from there until you finally kill him off. We think that this is very likely to be the way that you'll want to do it on live, but potentially, as we already said, there are lots of different ways we can do it. One other way that we didn't ever try but we were considering was just keeping everyone in the Fear realm at all times and only going into the normal realm just to reset your Hysteria stacks at some point. The only issue with the strategy is that if the debuff has just been reapplied, it does take 25 seconds for it to drop off, which is a fair amount of time that you'll be away from the raid, which means healers are going to have to go back to the normal realm with you. However, if you time it before a Dark Pulse, when no other mechanics are happening whatsoever, then it would probably be safe to do so. The only other issue with the strategy is that tanks are also going to need to reset their stacks at some point, which can be risky with their timing on their Mind Tether. But by remaining in the Fear realm, there are a lot of positives, as you can always instantly swap to the ads, and the boss is going to have a consistent damage increase up on him because of the circles that the tank's going to be soaking. But it's certainly a more risky strategy than using the normal realm strat. But anyway, that's the fight. What do we think?
Yeah, I think that this boss, if pulled off correctly, could in theory be the best boss in this instance, if not the entire expansion so far.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I just love it. I like the way that the first 3 phases are kind of tutorials, right? So the first phase is like, this is how the boss works. You've got a big dick slamming across the platform. Make sure you're avoiding them. It's like, okay. Then the second phase is just teaching you how the Fear realm works in terms of like how you got to deal with those particular sets of mechanics. And then the third phase is how the Delirium realm works, which isn't, that complicated, but at least some DPS get to go in there and plow some damage and start getting used to it. And then phase 4 is just like, now do it all together with some enhanced mechanics, and you have complete freedom as to how you want to do that. Well, you just explained 2 strategies off the back, and I'm pretty sure neither of them is probably going to be like the meta strat. Something else is going to come out. And I just love how it trains you throughout the fight, and it never feels like, oh my god, what's happening, because you've always just been taught over this steady period of time, which is a really good way of doing it. And as for Mythic on this fight, it's pretty insane. In the last phase, instead of you having just to damage the boss to get through his Dark Pulse shield, you now need to damage certain ads within certain realms. So you have to be sending a Fear group down, you have to be sending a Delirium group down, also actually dealing with the boss's mechanics itself at the same time. I have no idea. This boss sounds absolutely mental. Now, a couple of issues I do have with this boss, the first of which is it's not entirely clear how the Manifest Nightmare pools are supposed to be interacting between realms, because sometimes you'll be in the Delirium realm and you're stood in the wrong position and you don't know that you are because you can't see anything on the ground, but you just die and get sent out early. Even in the normal realm, you could be stood in goo that you can't actually see, but sometimes you can see it, and sometimes you'll be stood in the position where that goo would normally be, but not be taking damage. Basically, it's super buggy right now. That thing just didn't seem to be working correctly.
Or it's intentional and they're just bastards.
They could be.
And if that is the case, then that really should only be in Mythic.
Yeah,
I think the
think
fact
so,
that that would be in normal mode, as an example, is brutal as hell.
Yeah, I think that if it is going to interact between realms, make it so it can be seen in all realms, and if you want to make that difficult thing where you don't know where it's going to be, make that a Mythic-only mechanic, as you said.
I think that's fair.
Because the thing that we ended up doing is just leaving all the pools generally around the middle of the room, so if you ever wanted to be safe in a realm, you could stand towards the edges, which also made it easier to avoid the tentacles slamming across the room. Also, the dread damage that we did encounter was very, very high, like kind of unfairly high. So it does look like, at least from the dungeon journal, which isn't always very accurate, that has been reduced somewhat. So let's just hope that they have put that into effect, because although it is the main source of incoming damage and the other sources of damage in the fight don't really do a whole lot, it would be better if it was more balanced. So maybe make it so the Hysteria stacks do more damage, but the dread damage has been reduced.
I agree with that completely, because the dread damage was ridiculous. As an example, on Mythic, if you was to dispel all of them at the same time, it just flat out one-shot the raid, unless you use like multiple damage reductions.
It's not really supposed to all be dispelled at the same time, though, is it? You're supposed to stagger it.
Yeah, maybe so, but you can only stagger it so much before the last person is feared outside the room and just dies anyway.
Unless you grip them back.
Unless you grip them back,
try to do,
or you tank in the middle of the room.
Which sucks because of all the tentacles.
And sucks because of all the puddles.
Yeah, so that's a little bit unclear. Either way, dread damage does need to be reduced a little bit. And a technical issue, which I think is super important to know about because of just how infuriating we found Jaina as an example, spell queuing. The boss does do ability orders in the last phase differently depending on what point you push him at, and this point seems to be arbitrary, and it changes how the phase plays out significantly, and it just feels like
to the point where it was breaking it.
Well, yeah, it would actually make it so the boss interrupted his Dark Pulse cast and instantly detonated all the dreads all at the same time. You didn't even dispel them. We just did your mythic strat, and it just killed everyone. So yeah, like that sort of thing I hope is just a bug. They seem to be adding spell queuing to more and more bosses where it's just delaying their own abilities and kind of just giving you some really funky combos, and I'm just not a fan of it. Otherwise, I think this boss, as I said, could simply be one of the best bosses they've released in years. Just remove the spell queuing and don't touch anything else. I can't wait to see it on live servers.
Go through phases.
Go through phases. Just make that clear. Either way, I can't wait to see this boss in live servers. I think it's going to be awesome.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this boss preview, then do show us some love and give us a like. If you'd like to know more about the encounter or just be up to date with all the strategies that are going to be coming out over the next few weeks, then do check out our guides over on Wowhead. A link for that can be found in the description. And as always, we will see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.